Sir, how can they do this?
With the stroke of a pen, sir. Their field of honor was a desktop.
Long ago, when these ancient Grecian temples were new, hemp was already old in the service of mankind. For thousands of years even then, this plant had been grown for cordage and coarse cloth in China and elsewhere in the East. For centuries prior to about 1850, all the ships that sailed the western seas were rigged with hempen rope and sails. For the sailor, no less than the hangman, hemp was indispensable. The Conestoga wagons and prairie schooners of pioneer days were covered with hempen canvas. Indeed, the very word canvas comes from the Arabic word for hemp. In the old days, braking was done by hand, one of the hardest jobs known to man. Now the power breaker makes quick work of it.
The hemp industry can now recover 95% of the fibers, rather than the 25 to 50% as before.
In 1935, Henry Ford's desire to unite industry and agriculture would lead to the formation of the Farm Commercial Council. The Commercial model would use the country's farmers to supply the industrial needs of the 20th century. The expanded markets would bolster the dismal state of affairs on American farms and ease the emerging problems of petrochemical pollution. Ford and the Council would find support in the like-minded genius of Thomas Edison and plant geneticists George Washington Carver and Luther Burbank. In 1938, advances in hemp decortication equipment prompted Popular Mechanics magazine to call hemp the billion-dollar crop with 25,000 uses. The development sprouted a new kind of hemp industry in Minnesota, one poised to exploit the cellulose-rich herds for use in the plastics industry. In 1916, the Department of Agriculture published Bulletin 404, written by Leicester Dewey and plant and paper chemist Jason Merrill. Printed on hemp paper, the bulletin warned that forests cannot withstand the demands and praised the paper potential of hemp. Henry Ford had a vision of growing automobiles from the soil. At the company's River Rouge plant, researchers used annual crops to develop biodegradable car parts, and in 1941 unveiled a car whose plastic body was made entirely from hemp, wheat straw, and sisal. The bioplastic withstood blows 10 times as great as steel without denting, and its reduced weight promised better fuel efficiency.
1937 was my first summer to spend with my grandfather. And at that time, they grew hemp to make rope. And him and the next farmer had a machine, and you made your threads. Okay? After you had it on the spools, then you would go and make rope. But then in the latter years of the Depression, they banned it. It was banned by the government of North America. It came at just when the Depression was right at its worst, in this area, about 1937. The law was passed that it was illegal to have hemp seed. It was illegal to have it, and it was illegal to grow it. It was actually illegal to have hemp seed in your possession. It was stopped being used by Mackenzie King. And I would listen to the old timers, my Uncle Bill and my grandpa and Fred Wagner and those people talking. Like, they really felt that they had been hard done by.
Sir, how can they do this?
With the stroke of a pen, sir.
In 1942, in a full reversal, the U.S. Department of Agriculture presented the movie Hemp for Victory, encouraging farmers to grow hemp.
The hemp industry was in decline when the United States entered World War II. With the nation's supply of manila hemp and jute curtailed by the Japanese invasion of the Philippines, the government turned to the farmers for help. The war hemp industries built 42 mills throughout the Midwest. Hemp production rose dramatically as the nation's farmers produced 60 million pounds of fiber for the country's supply of cordage.
But then they banned it. It was banned by the government of North America.
In the waning years of the 20th century, the Earth's most useful crop re-emerged on farms the world over. For more than half a century, hemp was a crop in exile.
To bring into the world 200 million new people a year, that nearly equal to the population of the United States, and to not want to bring in a source of shelter and clothing and food is virtually irresponsible.
How does a massive underground market like this survive while remaining illegal? Why is marijuana illegal in the first place? And if prohibition is meant to protect us, I guess the most obvious question is, does the prohibition work?
If prohibition worked, okay, if you could just wave a magic wand and say, this has gone away, I'd be all over it, you know. But the fact of the matter is that prohibition has never worked.
You know, we've been here before. You remember the first prohibition, right?
On January 16th, 1920, the Great American Bender came to an end when the Volstead Act was signed into law and became the 18th Amendment to the Constitution. So began the Great Prohibition era, brought on in part by a decades-old grassroots temperance campaign organized largely by women that had already succeeded in banning liquor in 25 states. Now the entire country would go dry. Everywhere, law enforcement officials set about enforcing prohibition by tracking down stills and stashes and disposing of them. Throughout the country, raids were made on bootleggers' hideouts, and cask after cask of bathtub gin were hacked open by eager police. Unfortunately, prohibition had many unintended consequences. For one thing, it divided the country between dries and wets, those who supported or opposed the 18th Amendment. For another, crime soared as people turned to bootleggers to obtain their liquor. Supplying alcohol to a thirsty populace soon became the province of organized criminal syndicates, led by some of the most notorious figures in American history. The problems with legislating morality soon became abundantly clear as underground drinking spots, speakeasies, flourished as millions of Americans evaded prohibition and continued to party like never before. The glamour of the speakeasies proved a powerful attraction, and later research showed that more people drank during the 1920s than before Prohibition. Alcohol-related deaths increased substantially. In New York City alone, 700 people died in 1927, as opposed to only 84 in 1920. Along the coast, rum fleets took to the sea to run booze past Coast Guard patrols and the rest of the Prohibition Navy, which was allowed to shoot first and ask questions later. The bootleggers and organized syndicates armed themselves and operated sophisticated networks. Some, such as crime lord Al Capone, made tremendous fortunes during Prohibition. In one 3-year period, illegal alcohol sales topped $15 million. Around the nation, local district attorneys struggled with a glut of prohibition cases, which sometimes took up over 50% of their time. Law enforcement was costing the country millions. Franklin Roosevelt campaigned against prohibition during the 1932 election, and it was a stance that helped propel him to the White House. Finally, in December of 1933, the United States admitted failure and repealed the Volstead Act. Prohibition, with all its lofty moral goals, had at last come to an end.
Here in British Columbia alone, it's speculated that the illegal BC marijuana trade brings in upwards of $7 billion annually. And up to 85% of that product heads south to the United States.
On a meeting with General Bates. Now you stay where you are, Sheriff.